Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your girl, Ida Rodriguez, and this is another episode of Truth Serum. If you missed the episode yesterday that I did with Godfrey, it was a special episode. I've been doing, I'm going to be doing those periodically, bringing aboard comedians to talk about our issues from a comedic perspective and just to bring you more content. I want to say thank you to all of you who have been showing up. Especially on Facebook, you guys are just slamming it. And I just appreciate you sharing and, commenting and engaging and just participating in the conversations that have to do with us. I am here again. And I want to say, listen, you don't have to donate money if you don't have it. But if you share the content, if you tell people about it, that is more than enough for us. So I just want to say thank you to all of you who have been showing up. You are going to be here. I see you already showing up in the comments section. I want to say thank you because today this is an important show for me as a progressive, always having to defend my stand with my people and others about what that exactly means and why I choose to be a progressive and vote on policies versus being a part of the fandom and now becoming fans of, politicians as opposed to constituents holding them accountable for the jobs that we employ them to do. So in the spirit of fighting the good fight, today I've invited three special people to have this conversation with me. You know that I like to curate these panels and I like to bring the voices that are distinct voices from where I stand that are talking about the things that affect you every day. I don't suspect that anyone in the top 1% is watching this show. So if you're watching, then I'm talking to you. And if you are in the top 1%, then shame on you. You devil, you. You are a horrible human being. So today I have Eva Putzova. Is that correct? Did I say it? Eva Putzova. She's running for Congress in Arizona's 1st District. Her goal is to win her election and represent people, not corporations. Praise. Eva supports a Green New Deal and Medicare for all, which should be a litmus test in this election cycle. Because if you don't support access to health care for everyone during a pandemic, then what are you doing? What are you doing? Frederick Joseph is an award-winning marketing professional, a 30 under 30 list maker, and former national surrogate to two of the most progressive candidates for president in recent history, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. He has a book coming out in 2021 titled The Black Friend. I'm looking forward to that. And he's also responsible for donating, getting money to people who needed relief during this horrific pandemic and or people who were out of work. He had a program or an initiative called Rent Relief. And it was interesting to watch him, wholeheartedly give out money to people and then have to expose some of the racists who collected some of the money from him. So welcome, Frederick and Eva.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. And last but not least, my friend, my colleague, journalist, Brooke Thomas is back. And this is her second time here. You've seen her on the Young Turks. You see her on Fox Soul. She's doing her own thing. A very, very powerful voice for young Black women in America right now who speaks her piece all the time. Hi, Brooke. I can't hear you. Your phone, I think you're muted. I think we can't hear you. Is there a reason why I can't hear you? So, Frederick.
Yeah.
Okay. And Eva?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. So first of all, I want to welcome you all here and say thank you for joining me. This is, we do it on the ground here. What we do at Truth Serum is we have these conversations. People have been showing up, they've been sharing it, and they've been just, they feel good that people are finally speaking up about the things that are important to them. Because quite honestly, you've seen politics turn into a circus before your very own eyes, the dumbing down of the world, people being emotionally driven. And so much is being taken away from the people that right now that they just stay in survival mode. We need to have the conversations to push things forward. I would love for each of you to just describe what being progressive is. What is progressivism and what that means to you. And I'll start with you, Frederick.
Yeah, so I think progressivism for me entails various things, right? But the general idea of it is moving forward, right? Moving forward for people on the margins, moving forward for the most vulnerable of us. And in America, that tends to be, people of color, Black, brown, people who are in the LGBTQ plus community, women, children, and the ways in which our systems have been disproportionate for them, and they haven't been able to move and be as flexible within them, or as what's the word I'm looking for? There's a word I'm looking for that I'm sure that Eva would would fill that in with. But go ahead, Eva.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So for in the U.S. context, progressivism unfortunately means just fighting for basic decency and basic programs and services. As Frederick mentioned, it should be moving forward. But here in 2020 in this country, we still have to fight for healthcare to be considered a right and not privilege, and for working people to not live in poverty. And so in this context, it's really fight for life.
Brooke?
Does my mic work now?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. For me, I think kind of touching on what Fred was saying, it's just progress for me. I think it means in all aspects of life, progressing. So of course, that means environmental policy, that means income equality, but it also means racial equality. I think it means like progressing towards a system, a country that treats everybody like humans and creates policies within our systems that help do so. And I think, unfortunately, it looks a lot like a little left of typical Democrat policies, but still just as white-centered as before. And we got to fix that.
So I want to get into this. I always like to look at things from the lens of people of color, but I want to stay on the people hijacking being progressive and framing it in this socialist, communist, from this perspective, as if with Latinos, the reason why you see a lot of Latinos who get scared when they hear, specifically if they're from Venezuela or Cuba, they hear socialism and they just run because they're like, wow, they're trying to turn this country into Cuba. So I just I want you guys to express and explain from your perspective why it is important that people understand what socialism, communism really is, what being progressive in America, and how socialism in America not only exists, but it only exists to benefit the top % of the population. So I would love for you to just jump in, and just let me and just explain to people, because basically what I would love for this show to be is a basic education for those who don't know what these policies really mean when it comes to us.
Well, I can jump in first if that works. So first of all, we've had social programs for as long as the country's been around, right? And we tout them and put them on a pedestal and things of that nature, such as when FDR did the New Deal. That was a socialist program, actually, that came about during the Great Depression to help lift us out of there, right? Like things like Central Park wouldn't exist without a socialist program. Now, as much as we understand that gaslighting and manipulation happens on the right from people like Donald Trump, to be quite frank, we also have a bit of that in the Democratic Party and from people who are more moderate or not as far left, I suppose, as what Brooke was saying. Now, the issue is that, you have politicians. Let's use somebody like, let's use a Pete Buttigieg, right? Pete Buttigieg, while I'm sure he's a great guy, his thing is the status quo, right? His whole baseline was built on bringing us back to where we were before Trump, which frankly wasn't good enough for people who were living in poverty, people who were struggling to get access to education, healthcare, so on and so forth. Now, what's further left than that is actually trying to create equitable bridges for those issues. But for the people who are in that moderate space, they've used some of that same gaslighting and some of that same manipulation to say that these ideas of equality are radical because, to be frank, it doesn't benefit them. And not only does it not benefit them, it actually causes them to give up some of their own spaces that they've created, keeping certain people marginalized.
So, Eva, you have a responsibility to have to educate people along the way because you're actually running for office. So when you're running for office, people ask you the questions. Mm-hmm. And so, I would love for you to speak from a personal perspective in terms of understanding what socialism is mm-hmm. and explaining to the people.
So I grew up in a totalitarian regime in the former Czechoslovakia. In Slovakia, I was actually 12 years old in 1989. When people decided enough of censorship, enough of kind of totalitarian regime. And so I do understand when you're saying, people who come from, socialistic but totalitarian regimes, that they kind of conflate the political and economic systems. And so I do understand what they mean when they are afraid of these terms, socialism and communism. And the reality is that what we progressives are advocating for is not some centrally run state economy. What we are advocating for is that we have strong social safety net, that we have programs and policies that ensure that all people can have a decent life in this country. And then, in fact, they have the kind of opportunities that allow them to thrive. And we have not had these programs or these opportunities, really, because we don't have the basics. People, I think, are so used to living in a constant stress and kind of are used to accepting the life as is and the constant hassle and struggle for just food and shelter and medical care, that we don't really realize that people in the developed democratic world, that's not how they live. I benefited hugely from a fully publicly funded college education. We have public colleges and universities, but they are not fully publicly funded. Therefore, we have ever-growing tuition. And so I think, for people to realize that the world doesn't have to be, or their world, their lives don't have to be the way they've been experiencing in the past, and they actually can get medical care, and they don't have to worry about medical bills ruining their future. And we know that can be done because it's been done elsewhere. This is not a pipe dream, and it's not really socialism. I think we can debate about the philosophical underpinning of socialism or communism, but I think, to me, focusing on these labels that to some people who have been brainwashed by 40 years of this country's official position, when it comes to the foreign affairs, that's not going to change. So let's just talk about what do we mean by Medicare for all or universal health care? What do we mean by every single person being able to go to college and get education? Obviously, meeting the admissions criteria for the college. So, I'm not saying that everybody needs to go to college. So that's a long rambling.
No, and everybody.
I think we all have to.
But we need to address the disparities in the testing criteria to go to college based on the education system that some people have, based on the neighborhood they live, based on white supremacy. Brooke, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I'm sorry. But I do think we all have to reprogram our brains and our thinking and how we think about things and look at things, because I think we all want this. But the uber wealthy, and especially this country, have tricked us all into doing things that keep them uber wealthy. And it's fascinating. You look at, if you just go on Twitter, look at how, I don't want to pile on, but someone who is obviously not a big billionaire, but who's doing well, bagging on people who work 9 to 5s, people who are working 9 to 5s, bagging on people who are collecting unemployment in the middle of a pandemic, people who are struggling to keep their restaurants open, giving interviews, bagging on people who are finally able to make somewhat of an okay wage with unemployment. When we talk about raising minimum wage, people who feel like they're really well-meaning people arguing passionately that people who work at McDonald's shouldn't make the same amount as people who are paramedics, when really, shouldn't everybody who works 40 hours a week be able to pay their rent and eat 3 times a day? You know what I mean? People who feel like they have really great arguments as to why things shouldn't be fair. And we've all just been tricked into believing this and not even realizing when we're perpetuating it.
Yeah. Actually, I think you raised a very good point, and the psychologists actually studied this. This is actually called last place aversion paradox, and we have to understand that we cannot run away from human psychology. And so not being the last on that imaginable ladder of success is what's driving these sentiments. And it's real, it's happening, in every aspect of our society. And so raising that bar for everybody makes the people who are just above the bar feel like they're losing their relative position. And we know the culture is so focused on success, on from the day you're born to the day you die. There's competition and contest, and it's just so I think we have something to learn from all of this knowledge that psychologists became to understand about our brains, how we are programmed.
So, we don't back away from the uncomfortable here. And we do talk about race head on, because race has become such a big conversation piece right now. People got Black Lives Matter symbol, posters on their company windows because they don't want their windows broken. But the reality of it is that, right now it is trendy, right? It is mainstream to be an activist. And a lot of people who've been fighting this fight for a long time on the ground are like, finally, are we getting some help? But are they really getting some help? People are co-opting the movements. When we talk about this progressive agenda, Frederick, you were working with Bernie Sanders, you were working with Elizabeth Warren, and called the sellout for that, being a Black man. But you were fighting for the policies, because those policies will be more beneficial to Black people than the policies that the Black people and the brown people who were running were standing for. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know that this is, I get it all the time, so I know.
Yeah. It's disheartening. It hurts, because the reality of it is that two things can be true, right? Representation can absolutely be important, and at the same time, representation can also not necessarily equal systemic change, right? It's something that you and I spoke about earlier. And we saw that with the 2020 primaries for the Democratic nom, in that, I think Kamala is a phenomenal candidate. I think that she's more progressive than any president that we would have had in history. She just wasn't the most progressive, or actually a progressive at all, in reality, as a Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren or a Julian Castro. But what you find is that, tribalism is one of the main issues that we have in this country. The idea that people who look like us, sound like us, feel like us are inherently out to benefit us or move an agenda forward that's going to work for all of us, right? It's a blind spot that I think that most of this country has. The reality of it is, based on the things that Eva and Brooke were talking about, there were only a few candidates talking about any of those, right? In a world where, or rather in a country where Black people have this historic inequity, right? The historic disparities in education, healthcare, just the baseline things that we've seen during COVID-19, and yet still these same people that Black people were rooting for during the 2020 election are not vying for that, right? Like Joe Biden, for instance, is someone who gets a Black pass, I suppose, or a cookout invite based on his proximity to Barack Obama as a Black man. And yet Joe Biden also still doesn't think that education should be free. And instead of defunding the police, he actually said that they should get more funding, and instead of shooting people, just shoot them in the leg. So yeah, I'm gonna go with the people who aren't saying that.
Yeah. So Eva, I want to ask you a question, because I want to ask you regarding race and culture, because you are in Arizona, which we call baby Texas. So I know, how much do you get from people telling you to go back to your country, or that you're trying to bring your social,
Yeah. Well, I was on the city council for 4 years, and what I heard from is essentially that I'm ruining it I'm ruining the life Americans have ever known. Somehow these progressive ideas that I've been fighting for are in a conflict with the American culture, of course, because I'm a white, so obviously I have a huge privilege from that perspective. And the moment I open my mouth, it's obvious that I'm an immigrant. But I do want to just point out, like in this district where I am, which is Arizona's 1st district, this district has the largest Native American population of any district. So 25% of all people who reside here are indigenous. And the racism can have, all kinds of shades and flavors, right? As we all know. And in this part of the country, it's so obvious that the racism is doing well. In the city, the largest city in the district, Flagstaff, 52% of all arrests are Native Americans. And when you look at what they're being arrested for, it's a non-violent kind of offenses. So, that's the flavor in this district, and it's institutionalized, and it's systematic. The fact that Navajo Nation has the highest COVID-19 rate of any states or territory is not by accident. It is because of the official policies of these countries that first it was a policy of genocide, really genocide, and then policies of dislocation and assimilation. And those policies still exist to some degree today. And, this is why we have, 30% of people on the Navajo Nation don't have running water. 15,000 households on the Navajo Nation don't have electricity. Hundreds and hundreds of miles of their roads are unpaved. Kids have to spend 2-3 hours on a bus going to and from school under, non-pandemic situation. So they're systemic issues, and I do believe that we have to deal with that, with those, and we have to prioritize. That's the thing, is like we have to put money where our mouth is, and we have to invest in these communities, and we have to invest in these communities even if we don't invest elsewhere. So we really, and that is the hardest part for the rest of the folks to realize, that by putting, like in this case, first people first, or in Black communities, putting Black people first means that somebody will be second. Some money will not go to those other uses.
So, it's interesting that you say that, because when we have these conversations, we tend to, the First Nations people are oftentimes left out of the conversations. We have become so used to erasing the struggle of First Nations people, and we lose intersectionality, because a lot of Black American people have First Nations roots and ancestry, and there's an intersection of the two. But Native women go missing and we don't hear about them, and they get murdered and we don't hear about it. But when we talk about creating equity with these policies, Brooke, I think it's important for people to understand that there are no reparations for Black people in America. And there's a lack of education in the communities, or quality education, because the teachers are overworked, they're underpaid, they don't have the books that they need. So when we talk about a free education, which is not a free education because we pay in taxes to potentially create a military that can go to outer space, but we cannot create funds to create better schools for people in our communities. What do you say to people when they talk about how free healthcare? I'd rather work for mine. Like I'm not paying so that those people can get free healthcare.
Yes. Well, I think the pandemic said a lot to a lot of people who were mistakenly not wanting to share what little they do have. But I also think, it's not about like, if you focus on this group, then this group comes last. The situation that we are currently living in is so broken and awful and unfair that focusing on these groups just sort of inches towards like equaling things. We're never going to get to a position in this country where, Terry Cruz's worst nightmares come true. It's it's just, things are so far off right now. We're just trying to share. It's just not even realistic. So you have to focus on these groups in order to just help us like get back, not even back, it's never been there, but just like help us, help share, help us get better. You have to, and also like you have to listen to those people. I think that's a big part of progressivism that is, it is just erasing, I think, diversity and inclusion. That has to, that's progress, right? That's what I thought, but it doesn't seem to be what a lot of the leaders in the movement think. I think Elizabeth Warren did a really great job of focusing on people who didn't look like her and listening to them and bringing them into the conversation. But overall, we've got to start listening to people who look like me, look like you, Ida, people who don't look like us, but who aren't in the power. And it's not, that's just not happening. And we can't reach true progress until that does. I feel like I'm saying crazy things, but.
Yes, we all feel that way. They may feel like we're crazy, but when you go on social media, whenever you are brave enough to do that, and you see all these small businesses going out of business, and you see the article that Jeff Bezos is teetering off into becoming a trillionaire, and then you see people fighting in this country for that, saying, if somebody works for it, you don't work for $1 trillion by yourself. Like, you don't work for $1 trillion by yourself. You do it by not paying people well, not letting them go to the bathroom, keeping them on assembly lines as if they are, in concentration camps. We have to be honest about what it is. And we can't have these conversations, because when you start speaking out to that, it is labeled as being un-American. And now you see that America is the passport. Your passport is worth nothing. Other countries are now shutting their borders down, saying, no, you guys are the plague. And we don't want to look within ourselves and really address these issues that are ruining what our country is supposed to be representing, right? Because it hasn't. It never has. So,
yes.
Good.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, go ahead.
No, it's like, I love that you brought up passports, because our passport is not looking like it was. But the joke online, it was like, people who buy Jordans, you need to get a passport. You can't do anything with that passport. Now, you can sell those Jordans on StockX and pay your rent. So who's laughing now? You know what I mean? Like, it's just, the environment is just punched down. That's that's what makes people feel good. And then everyone doesn't realize while they're punching down that they're down.
We're getting a little bit of our own medicine right now. It wasn't that long time ago where people from the country where I grew up, Slovakia, couldn't just pick up a passport and go to this country. No, we had to stand in line in front of US embassy, to get visa, and we only got the visa if we could prove that we are wealthy enough, or we have some credible reason to come back to this, to back home. And so I think this idea that America is so used to being traveled and welcome because we are a very wealthy country and being welcome everywhere, and suddenly things are slightly different because we are not able to control virus spreading in our backyard. I think it's very, you do feel when you come from a country where you cannot just travel easily, you feel inferior. And suddenly we are, as Americans, we start understanding what it means to not have the freedom to travel.
Yeah, it's humbling. Frederick, you were going to say something.
No, I mean, I was just going to actually agree with everything that was going to be said, or that was said rather. Brooke brought up Elizabeth Warren, and I wanted to call something out just in relation to progressive policies. One of the reasons why Elizabeth Warren ended up being my candidate that I was a surrogate first for before Bernie Sanders is because there's intersectionality that's still needed even in the progressive space, right? So it's not enough to say, oh, everyone should go to school for free. Well, if that's the case, right, let's say because of the historic, disproportionate systems and inequities that we have, white people are here in terms of access, right? And let's say Black people, First Nations people, so on and so forth, right here. If we make college free for everyone with no understanding of the intersectionality of, white supremacy, then this is going to keep on happening, right? If everyone has free healthcare, then this is going to keep on happening. The same gap still exists. And I think what Elizabeth Warren did in listening to Black and brown people would say, okay, college, yeah, everyone should have access to college, and Black people should also have, right? Everyone should have access to healthcare, and Black women also are not listened to, therefore they should also have. And I think that's one of the things that needs to grow in the progressive space is an understanding of the intersectionality of the oppressions.
Well, what I want to say is I can't, when we were talking about earlier about Obama, you can't possibly support anything or love anything if you cannot look at it critically without being able to support something. These are the things that are weak because nothing is perfect. And that exists within the Progressive Party as well. Whereas we can say this is probably where I rest because the policies support what I stand for, but there are areas where we can grow as a result of what this represents and what it's supposed to be doing, which is progress, right? And so I will say this, a lot of people keep bringing up Clyburn because people want to talk about Joe Biden and they want to talk about how Black people have been moved emotionally, Latinos as well, and the pimping of people of color. Whereas for me, because I started in the game voting for policies, I registered independent when I started voting because I realized that I was not going to be a fan of a politician. And I wanted to vote for the policies. Now, when we have these conversations, because of what's in the White House right now is so toxic and so bad, we now can't even utilize that on our side to say, we still got to hold Joe Biden accountable, and we still have to make sure that the policies benefit us, because there are a lot of people right now who feel that Joe Biden is not going to really make that big of a difference, other than he's not going to be outwardly crude, rude, abrupt, and dumb. So how do we deal with making sure that people feel that they are being honored for their votes, even if Donald Trump is not the choice? How do we hold Joe Biden accountable to people of color who is in the moment of where we've seen Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd, and so on and so forth, talking about investing even further into the police department and doubling down on this crime bill?
So I think there's something else going on. I do think what we need is intergenerational solidarity, and there is this big conundrum that we are in is because of this young and old conflict, right? because I do think that I have to believe that we are on the right trajectory, but we running into these obstacles. All the people say that, well, why should you have free college? I had to pay for my own, right? And so we need that solidarity, that's intergenerational, on top of the interracial. We need that. We need it to go both ways, obviously, for various reasons. But what we've been seeing is that, the generation that still holds power of money, social capital, political capital, and has benefited from the kind of policies that we've seen over the last 40, 50 years, is not quite as willing to recognize that the next generation should have that power, and we are asserting the power, right? And despite these challenges, and so I think that's a big piece of the puzzle that I wish from the older generation to say, no, you guys, we're going to vote for you because you understand climate change better than we can understand, because our lifespan is a different point.
Well, I think that, and I'm going to speak from the lens of the Black community. One of the things that we say on a regular basis is that Blackness isn't a monolith, right? And and that is an absolutely true statement. So one of the things that I hate that people do, that we assume, is that Black people all have the same kind of voting record, the same agenda for the Black community. And I bring this up in relation to the mentioning of Clyburn, because one of the things that I saw was that, South Carolina chose Joe Biden, right? And that is something that happened. And and it's inherently rooted in white supremacy, that people said that because South Carolina Black people chose Joe Biden, that means that Black people chose Joe Biden nationally. And that's just not the case, right? Because at the end of the day, to the point that Eva made, I don't even think that in our community it's just a matter of age. It's also a matter of the haves and have-nots, right? Like, I sit in a place of immense privilege. And thus, a lot of the tables I sit at are with other Black people who have immense privilege. And I'm typically the only person who's a progressive and the person who's radical about certain things, because other Black people are just oftentimes happy to have something. We're so conditioned at times in our comfortability, if you would, once we do get access, that we want to keep it that way, right? Like, getting a Joe Biden was the only agenda that some Black people had from a financial standpoint, right? Because they wanted to keep the benefits and the comfortability that they had. So again, I think that in our community, there's layers to why people are voting differently.
Brooke?
I was like itching to jump in on that, because I agree. I think that there are layers within our community, and I think that while we also understand that we're not a monolith, the fact that we're not a monolith should make it important for us to include all aspects of the conversation. And I didn't see that happening. I do totally agree with what you're saying, as far as like what happened in South Carolina doesn't necessarily mean every single one of us, but it was such a massive, powerful statement that all of those people should have been included in the conversation a year before that. And they weren't as strongly. It's just kind of like when Representative John Lewis came out and endorsed, I think it was Biden at the time. And I just saw so many people who I thought that were as progressive as me, like calling him stupid and a coward, and saying that he didn't care about us. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I'm not cool with this, because what I know of Representative Lewis is what I look at as progressivism. What he's fought for his entire life helped us progress to where we are now, as far as Black people in America. And so, although that may not have been what I agreed with, my first thought is to try to understand where he's coming from. And I wish that there was more like, yes, we should be critical. And yes, we are allowed to disagree with our elders, but shouldn't we desire to bring them into the conversation and just try to find some understanding where you can still end up disagreeing? But
Do you think?
I just think.
I was going to say, do you think the push, what happened in South Carolina, was more because it was more of solidarity in the spirit of we don't want more Donald Trump than it was we love Joe Biden?
I was. Go ahead.
I think that the super progressive movements weren't as inclusive as. I mean, and I think this is somebody who wasn't necessarily on that team. I think just like someone who considers herself progressive, didn't feel like the movement was as inclusive at all. So as I think people would, it just, there was too much for me of shut up, we're trying to help you. And if you don't already see yourself on this side, how could you, if that's a lot of the energy you're getting, if you're a more conservative Black American, you know what I mean? I think it was just not as inclusive as it should have been, and I think we should learn from this. And I'm what I struggle with now is that I don't see us learning from that. It's like they'll all die soon. That seems to be what the argument is. Oh, they'll all die soon because the kids thought this, and that's not. I don't know. That's not the world I want to live in.
So I was gonna. Sorry. I think what Brooke is saying is absolutely correct. I think there's numerous things that were true, right? I was on the ground in South Carolina for weeks at a time for Warren and things like that, and I think I did see some of that for sure. And I've had that same criticism of the progressive movement as a whole, and every movement, is not inclusive of Black people, but I've had that same criticism. But I also think the other thing that we have to realize, and this is actually an age thing, is and also a wealth thing, and also just a history thing, is the goalposts are going to always be different, right? Like in South Carolina, what I was told oftentimes was, we're just trying not to get lynched. We're just trying not to have Confederate flags all over the place. If we can get to that, where I can go down the street without worrying that somebody's going to be emboldened to attack me, I'm fine. I don't need healthcare. I don't need these other things. That's what people were telling me. Don't need it. Can you just give us Biden? Because we know, white people love Biden. White people, and that's another thing actually. Black people are oftentimes scared of what they think white people will allow us to have, right? White people won't give us Bernie. White people won't give us Elizabeth Warren. Therefore, let's just rock with whoever white people are willing to give us.
So, Eva, you are running for office, and you hear the cries of the people, right? The people of color, the all of them, Indigenous, Latino, Black. If you get in office, what do you think are some of the first things that you'll be able to get done, that you're going to charge for? Because it's like a big hole right now, and we're trying to put a little Band-Aid over it, but there's so many. It's everywhere. It's just exploding all over the place, and we're learning that America is not as great as we've always thought that it was, or have been trained to believe that it was. What are some of the things you want to work on first?
So obviously, as a progressive, I support these big transformative policies like Medicare for all, like the Green New Deal. I want to see a complete immigration overhaul so we can have actually a system that's humane, that we treat people as human beings and not something inferior. But I think there is also, reality. We have 435 members of Congress. The progressive faction is small, and we're hoping it's going to be bigger. So as a voting bloc, it's going to have hopefully more power. But we have to be also realistic to understand that, we have to get the entire Democratic delegation behind some of these policies. So there are multiple roles that elected representatives play. One thing is how you vote, what you vote for, and when you decide not to vote for something, even though majority of your Democratic colleagues are going to vote for it. I mean, most Democrats always, when they think that the budget is good enough, they vote for it, even though for years and years and years, half of that budget goes to Department of Defense. we had our so-called progressive voting for it, right? And so I think it's important to use the vote strategically. As elected representatives, and I know that from just my local city council member stint, that you have also access to media. And what we need is to normalize these good for people policies, and rather than allowing them to be demonized. Like if people, like if Biden doesn't like Medicare for all, or some of these other moderates, they don't want every single person in this country to have healthcare, then where is their proposal? What have they done? And I think we need to just use our voices with public for them to see that there is actually political or segment of representatives who are willing to fight for the people and put people first and not corporate interests, because underneath it all, we're fighting over all kinds of things, but we have to realize that in reality, it's the corporations who are running this country, who are buying politicians. And so obviously those big policies are on my radar. And I want to use my voice and my personal experience and talking to people and feeling them like it's okay to get behind these big, bold policies these are not just some pie in the sky policies or dreams. We should be more ambitious. I feel like what I struggle with is how come today's Americans are they lack ambition when it comes to the quality of life they could have. And why cannot we just say, no, we deserve it. We deserve to not live in poverty, right? We deserve to have healthy environment and not constantly being threatened by fires or floods or all kinds of things that are a result of climate change. We deserve to have healthcare that's high quality and that it's not going to ruin us financially. And we deserve education that's available to us where we live and it's high quality, and we do not have pay out of pocket, because as a society we recognize this as being so important and so foundational.
How do we get the information to the people when the political landscape right now has become so toxic? You have the governor of Georgia suing the mayor of Atlanta for not wanting for mandating masks, right? You have Orange County in California fighting Governor Newsom because they've politicized wearing masks for your well-being in this country. Donald Trump and his administration have made strategized a plan to prey on people who don't have the benefit of a good education, and let's not even say good, just say an education, are too busy working, and they are being puppeted through emotional stuff. So to tell somebody wearing a mask is somebody infringing on your constitutional rights, which people walking around with made up HIPAA cards saying HIPAA says I don't have to. My chiropractor says I don't have to wear a mask. How do we get sensible information to the people when the media itself is participating in the circus? And we are basically fighting for our lives at this point, right? So how do we get this information to them?
I feel like those people just can't be helped because it's so hypocritical. Like the same people who want to go into a business and say, I have a card that says I don't have to wear a mask, are also the same people who would fight for that same business not selling a cake to a gay person. And then also fight for a young woman not to be able to choose to have an abortion, like her own body. So what can you do to somebody who just wants to be on top, who like no logic, just because I like to do what I like to do? Like, what can you truly say to somebody who hears this is how you protect other human beings from potentially dying? And it's not even a real deep inconvenience because you're supposed to have your behind at home all the time anyway. What do you say to somebody who says, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to help.
Right. You know, I feel like go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's exactly what you said. I feel like we spend, honestly, so much time on trying to help the people who don't want to be helped, right? Like the people who are, to be quite frank, setting back our society in many ways, right? Like the people who are putting our lives in danger as opposed to focusing on the people who are trying to get it right, you know? So while I do feel as though, you know, the person in my building who tried to get in the elevator with me 2 days ago and didn't wear a mask, I feel bad for them because they're an idiot, but I'm worried more about giving my little brother COVID if this person has it, right? And I think that's the work right now, is actually making sure that they actually are lawfully have to stay away from other people, frankly. I think that's the actual work at the moment.
Eva, you stand in a unique position as someone in public office, and you have to deal with people coming at you from the place of fix it, and it's from both sides, because both sides feel dignified in their stand. So how do you get the real information out to people?
So I'm not in a public office now. I was on the local city council for 4 years, but I'm not, because I'm running for Congress. But hopefully, eventually, soon, I will be. And so I do think that there is, you know, on the one hand, I think what we're experiencing in some communities is a lack of political courage, because I think what Mayor of Atlanta has done is exactly what all mayors should be doing, even though when they're dealing with governors who just don't care about the health of the people and they just care about some short-term profit of the corporate world. And so I think at all levels, what we need to promote and support these people who do have that political courage that say, just like Mayor of Atlanta saying, well, good, sue me, see you in court. I think we need more of that. And that is and can be very powerful. I think we are in a moment which is very scary because, we don't have this virus under control. People, we do need actually some national standards. I mean, we see it from countries that were successful in kind of fighting the virus, that, there were early and clear, not just guidelines, mandates. And this country is, what's also wonderful about this country, the diversity and the kind of, states have different arrangements, and then local municipalities do different things. But that also shows huge weakness when it comes to dealing with pandemic. And we have to think about the future, not just this, but what about there can be another virus, another thing. Like, this is where, talking about national security, this is where we need to invest money in healthcare. That's the greatest, national insecurity that we have, not something overseas.
So when I was saying that you're in public office, I was speaking hypothetically. And
Thank you.
I was giving it to you. So you come from the Czech, and this question is going to come from the Czech Republic, where the religion is predominantly Christian, Catholic, right? Black people in America, Latinos, tend to be Christian. We have some Muslims. What do you say to people who say that the progressive agenda is part of this agenda to get rid of Black people and brown people because they're pushing LGBTQ issues? They are pro-abortion. Like, those are, because those are some of the things that I get, like that. Mm-hmm. Why that's like a white person's stand. Like, you trying to get rid of us with pushing the gay people and pushing the gay agenda, and it's become. We've gotten reduced to having those conversations, even when we're trying to talk about policies to improve the lives and the quality of lives of people.
Yeah, so I grew up as an atheist, and so I personally have no religious views. But of course, I do think that people have the right to exercise religion. I do think that in this country we're very bad about separating state and church, and I think that has been used politically. And these issues, these social issues, then become the litmus test issues, and people vote about it. Even though, like I have to tell you, I've been getting in the last about 2 months, tons of cards from older folks in the district telling me about how abortion is bad, right? People who probably have no need for reproductive health care, and yet they're so focused on that because they are being played. And I think this is the part that we, on the progressive side, we have to figure out how to work with people who want the same, economic prosperity for everybody. And I recognize that, we have to figure out how to make tolerance cool, right? Like, regardless of what you think, that's okay, as long as what you think is not actually restricting rights of others. But we know with the Trump administration, a lot of this just got normalized. I mean, it's not like racism was not here. I'm sure people who are now saying just openly racist things have been racist before. And they were thinking, but it was not quite, it was becoming less socially acceptable to actually verbalize and put. And so I do think that we have, responsibility to talk about these issues. To me, talking about LGBTQ is like, no, this is, in 2020, we should not accept intolerance toward LGBTQ folks or people of color or people of other religions, right? And so talking about tolerance, solidarity, these should be the kind of, values that, we teach not just kids, but I guess adults.
I see you both. So go ahead.
I think also, like, within ourselves, this is just like coming as a Black woman, like we also have to be inclusive and more understanding of each other, because I have heard that, I hear that when you, from some people, but when you talk about the LGBTQ community and fighting for their rights, and also immigration, and even recently the Jewish community, how factually incorrect it is to separate those two, because the LGBT community is not non-Black. The Jewish community is not non-Black. Like, how do you forget about Drake? Like, you know what I mean? Arguably, outside of Beyonce, the biggest pop star is a Black Jewish man. Also, like, immigration. You're Latin American and Black, Aida. Like, and so I just think that when people have those conversations, like, my first thing is just that, like, okay, well, if you care about Black people, these are Black people. How can you separate something that includes us all?
Yeah. I see Fred on Twitter, you go in and you speak up on transphobia and homophobia.
Yeah, I think that the word tolerance for me has never worked, right? Because I don't think it's a matter of being tolerant of people, because that would say that there's something to be intolerant of. Let people do what the hell people are going to do, be whoever people are going to be. And to the point that Brooke made, two things can absolutely be true, right? You can't fight for Black people and not fight for all Black people, right? You can't talk about the systemic issues that impact Black men and not also talk about those issues impacting Black women, right? We can't talk about the inequities in finding, a job or healthcare and not understand that the most marginalized within the Black community are Black trans women. Because, a rising tide lifts all ships is the way I view it. And if we are absolutely working with the most marginalized of us, that means that the conditions for the rest of us are increasing and getting better anyway.
Someone keeps saying, why won't anyone say African American? I don't use that term. The people who I know who are very close to, who are leaders from all across the aisle, don't call themselves African American. They don't call themselves I don't call myself Hispanic American. I don't use the labels that white people created to classify us. So that's why you don't hear me say African American. But I would love to ask Brooke. And
it's not inclusive.
Yeah, it is. And so
so then you leave out Jamaican people, you leave out Haitian people, you leave out people, Aida, Dominican people, Puerto Rican people. It's not inclusive. At all.
The only time that I'm black, I'm blickety black, but the only time that I ever use African American is if we're talking in a historic context, right? Like if we're talking about, let's say, how the disproportionate things have impacted maybe a certain group before other groups, migrated, so on and so forth. And then I might use African Americans in a historical context, but it being inclusive of the diaspora of Black people, I am Black.
That we talk about, because I understand what happened in America to Black people in America. As even with regards to slavery in Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Cuba, Haiti, first of all. And then when you exclude Haiti, who kicked down the door for liberation, you can't have Toussaint Louverture and Marcus Garvey, and you can't have Louis Farrakhan, and you can't have, you can't have the people, Malcolm X, and you can't have them because they're Caribbean Black people. So that is why I say Black people. But I digress. But I like to address some of the questions that come through from the people who watch, because I want people to know that this is an interactive experience and all questions are valid. So I hope that was an answer for you. The path forward, because that's what being progressive is about. Where do we start today in order for us to have some semblance of results in November that are going to benefit marginalized communities? And it begins, and I'm not, and I shouldn't just say November. I mean this year, because I'm talking, you have to think locally, you have to think regionally. You cannot just think nationally, because a lot of these local politicians are supporting policies that are affecting your well-being.
Primaries, it's where it is. I mean, in the primaries is when we at the local, state or national level are choosing between progress and let's go back to pre-Trump era. And unfortunately, that window of opportunity when we can make that choice is going to end by, essentially August. I don't know, there's some primaries still in September, I think Massachusetts or something, but on a national level. And so I think there's so few people voting in primaries, actually. That's the scary thing, is that's when really we are deciding the future of this country at all levels. And yet we don't quite, because they're party primaries and the parties have interest in not making primaries a thing. And so the rest of us, the progressive institutions that exist outside of parties, they need to take it on, making voting in a primary a thing. And it's not quite a thing.
Yeah. It's funny, and I'm happy that you called that out, because part of the reason that it's not a thing is what I said earlier, because it benefits some of the establishment Dems for it not to be a thing, right? And that's the honest conversation. And I think that there needs to be accountability around the ways in which we ourselves being, I guess the Democrats, have tried to keep people miseducated or uneducated and misinformed, and have leaned into some of the problematic and honestly racist practices of the same people that we're combating, right? Like, we're in this moment now where, specifically talking about November, you can't even criticize Joe Biden in any way, shape, or form without being called a Bernie bro, or a secret Trump supporter. You know, if I say like the man just said that people should be shot in the legs instead of killed, that is, I have a right to criticize that, right? And if we want him to get better, then I should criticize it. But
Especially
that's
the majority of the people he's talking about look like you.
precisely.
Yes.
And I think that's the issue that we have, a lack of accountability, that two things can be true. You know, so I'm hoping that accountability is one of the things that we indoctrinate people into moving forward.
Brooke?
What was the question again? It was
How do we move forward? How do we dispel all of this? How do we, how do we?
And I know you said like not just November, but I think that like everybody has to look within and start really focusing on fighting for all of us. I think we all struggle with like true inclusion, all of us.
They've divided,
and some of us way more, huh?
They've divided us so well that we we
don't even realize when we're fighting against each other, and how that actually doesn't help at all. We don't have to put anybody else down to bring ourselves up. And just like Fred was saying, like men have to fight for women. Cis people have to fight for the trans community. All of us straight people have to fight for the LGBTQ community. White people have to start and like really actually listen to Black people. So I think that everybody can really try to focus on inclusion.
I want to thank all of you for joining me on this conversation. This is, for me, has been like one of the best ones, because I think it's so important for people to understand what it means to be progressive. Because when people say to me, when I heard Joe Biden say, we're going to go back to the way things were before Donald Trump, we cannot ignore that when we go back, that does not mean good for us. And so for me, it's like, I don't want to go back. I want to move forward, because I can't think an administration that has been a good administration with regards to people of color, Black, brown, natives, women. Like when you think about it historically, where is the good? I just want to finish off by saying this. Your handles are up. Check out Eva's website and look what she stands for. And you should do that with everybody that you vote for. You should always know who you're funding. Don't fund your own oppression. Stop investing in companies that are investing in the worst things for you, and as well as politicians. Like, you have to be aware of your own habitat, because we got to take care of ourselves at this point. This is war. You were going to say something, Frederick? Oh, I want to say this quickly. Here at Truth Serum, we understand very well what has happened to Black people in America and the American descendants of slaves. We also acknowledge all of the Black people throughout the world, because being Black is global. It is not just an American thing. We continue to fight for the reality that nuance exists, and two things can exist at the same time. There can be an agenda to try to get rid of Black people all over the world by enforcing gay agendas, and at the same time, the gay people and the LGBTQ people in our communities belong to us, and they are ours, and we should care for them as well. So we can have these nuanced conversations, which I dare to have, because I dare y'all to cancel me every day. What we're not going to do is ignore the reality and ignore logic, because we know about the effeminization of Black men. We know that Black men were raped during slavery, and that was a mechanism to destroy the Black family. Nobody is saying that that's not true. When you say Black Lives Matter, I'm addressing some of the comments. Black Lives Matter is not just an organization, but an ideology that Black lives should matter. And whether you support the organization or not, you should be in support of lives of Black people being of just as much value as white lives in this country and abroad. So when we have these conversations, we're not going to ignore this. We can talk about what has happened, who has received reparations and who hasn't, but we're not going to ignore the fact that my grandmother's grandmother was a slave in Puerto Rico, and that Spain was not kind to its slaves. We're not going to romanticize slavery abroad in the Caribbean, and we're not going to romanticize slavery in the house. that is the point of me doing this show, because this is the foolishness that is out there, and we have to start dispelling this. So I want to give you the last word. In addition to what you're doing and what you want people to support, I would like for you to let people know what your personal ideology is to see a better world. And I'm going to start with you, Brooke.
My personal ideology to see a better world. Oh, I don't even know. I don't even know if I like briefly know how to answer that. But I think I feel like I keep saying the same thing over and over again, and I feel really passionate about it. But I do really want us to really sit back and reprogram ourselves, our own brains, how we speak about other people. And I like what you were just touching on, Aida, about yes, like descendants of slavery, we have a different beginning, but when it comes to things like police brutality, nobody's pulling you over and saying, okay, who are your ancestors? If you're Black, you're Black. And I want everybody to like really mean it, like in their actions, because racism isn't just about what's in your heart. It's about your actions, or sometimes like your lack of actions. And inclusivity sucks in every company, in every industry, in every aspect of this country right now. And even within our own communities, I really want us to do better. And then also check out my podcast. It's called Controlling Our Narrative. Little small plug there. Thank you for having me, Aida.
I love you here. Frederick, you got that.
I think last words, I want people to understand something very important, that, we talk about going back to normal before Trump and things like that. And as was said a second ago, normal before Trump wasn't equitable. It wasn't fair for people who look like me and probably people who look like you or someone who you love, right? Donald Trump is a symptom of a condition that he simply took advantage of, a condition that's existed since the Mayflower arrived on these shores. So that being said, my view for the world, my hope for everybody is, I guess I'll lean into power to the people. I do believe in Black Lives Matter. I'm tired of telling people that my life matters. I'm actually about trying to get power for my people now. And in terms of what I'm doing, my debut book, The Black Friend, pre-order is next month, and you can follow me at Fred T. Joseph to learn more about whatever else I'm talking about.
Eva.
So my personal ideology is to operate from a position of generosity and power. And that's what I hope that, I would hope for so many other people to embrace. Too many people are even approaching this election from a position of fear. They're telling us they're going to vote out of fear. No, vote out of power. And I really believe that, we can have a just, generous, inclusive, peaceful, and healthy, not just this country, but the entire world. For the next few weeks, for me, it's going to be, the final stretch of the campaign. Our primary election is on August 4th. And if those people who are watching us have spare time or spare money, we know how to put it to good use, and you can go to evaforcongress.com, and then under volunteer, you can sign up for one of our phone banking shifts. And of course, if you have spare change, we would love to invest it in people-centered policies for a candidate, me, who cannot be bought.
So thank you so much for being here. I want to say thank you to the people who've tuned in. And the reason why we do Truth Serum is so that we can have these conversations, speaking about issues about us from the most honest place. But I want to encourage every single one of you who are out there listening, living in Twitter land and living on Instagram land and Facebook land and YouTube land. It's very easy to sit at a computer, to sit on your phone and criticize people from the place where you're not taking action. So every single one of us is responsible for making this world a better place for ourselves and our children. And even though you may not be Oprah or you may not be Jeff Bezos and you can't do it on that grand scale, you can change the world by utilizing your words and making sure they matter instead of trying to bully people and try to perpetuate the worst things about human beings. It's very easy to sit around. The reason I wanted to say that today is because I've been watching what's going on, and people with suicide attempts and death and things are happening, and we are watching them in real time. How are you contributing to the better, making humanity better? And at the end of the day, all the money that Steve Jobs had did not alleviate that cancer. So that should just remind you that we're all just human beings, and we should always remember to be at least the best human beings that we can be. I want to say thank you to all of you for joining me on having this conversation. We're going to share this one. And listen, make sure that you vote. Vote for your grandmama, vote for your granddaddy, vote for all of those before you who couldn't vote. If it didn't matter, they wouldn't try to make it so hard. So trust me, your voting matters. Thank you so much for joining me today. We'll see you next week.